Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Patriots History. I'm Larry Swikart, leading you through the book, Patriots History of the United States. My co-author, of course, is Michael Allen, and we are now in our 20th anniversary edition. The only physical copy you can get is the 15th anniversary edition. But if you write me at larry@wildworldofhistory.com, I will send you a PDF of the update, which consists of a single chapter, 2018 to 2023, and inserts that you put in all through the book as you see fit. So just email me at larry@wildworldofhistory.com. Let me also remind you, if you're new to this channel, I have a full curriculum in U.S. and world history. Each one contains teacher's guides, student workbooks, tests with answer keys, all the images I used in my videos, and the U.S. course comes with 22 videos of 45 minutes to an hour each. The world history course comes with 15 videos of an hour to an hour 15 each. The units in the world history course are bigger, as are the videos. So check those out. You're going to want the curriculum. Oh, and no license to expire. Yours, as long as you want them, with as many kids as you want to use them with. So just check that out. Finally, make sure you check out my new book, Patriots History of Globalism. If you don't have the most updated copy of Patriots History, you can get that and Globalism for a single low price, autographed and shipped to you right at the Wild World of History website. Also, make sure you go way down on the website and sign up for our newsletter. You will get all sorts of interesting new stuff and alerts as to any sales or special offers we have going on. All right, well, let's get started. As you know, I am using the 15th anniversary edition. We are in Chapter 10, Ideals and Realities of Reconstruction, and I am on page 383. Let me just check something right here. Hold on. So what I was doing was checking that 20th anniversary edition update to see if there was anything that went in this section needed to be inserted, and there is not. So we're going to start on page 383 at the header, Freedmen and the Politics of the South. The second major question involving the freedmen, their political status, was almost immediately put to the test when, at the end of the war, blacks began to move about the South freely for the first time. This churning of human movement struck every observer, including Northern Army officers who witnessed train depots and country roads crammed with people. Hungry, sick, and barely clad freedmen clogged the roads between Vicksburg and Jackson. More than 125,000 slaves had been removed to Texas when the war started, and by 1865, they were heading home up the San Antonio Road to North Carolina and Georgia. Although much of the wandering reflected a desire to express the freedom of movement suddenly given to former slaves, more of the travel had the purpose of searching for family members or better work. Regardless of the motivation, any movement by free blacks terrified whites and led to the first real clash between the federal and state governments over political rights and the Reconstruction policies. As the new Southern governments created by Johnson's generous Reconstruction policies started to function, they passed laws designed to place restraints on blacks in negotiating contracts, travel, and weapons and property ownership. Mississippi, after what Governor B.G. Humphreys called, quote, 6 months of the administration of this black incubus, unquote, passed the South's first black codes in January 1866. The legislation required annual employment contracts, prohibited movement between counties without permission, and allowed local officials to arrest any black youth on charges of vagrancy if he did not appear to have a job. Of course, this is totally unconstitutional. No such things were ever visited on whites. The Mississippi Black Code was not entirely punitive. It recognized black marriages, something which was not done in slavery, legitimized a Negro's right to sue in civil court, confirmed his right to property, and required that all contracts with freedmen of periods longer than a month be in writing. Some of the, quote, guarantees, however, were meaningless. To freedmen, most of whom were illiterate and never had any contract with the legal system or the courts, the right to sue was hollow. The provisions that stirred up the most revulsion among blacks and which provoked the North to start down the road of congressional Reconstruction involved the vagrancy provisions. Vagrants were to be fined up to $100 and imprisoned. Worse, if a freedman was unable to pay the fine, he could be hired out as an apprentice until his fine and his court costs were covered. Another set of laws, ingeniously devised by individual states, placed huge license fees on recruiters who came in from other states to lure freedmen to work for better wages. The only purpose of the statutes was to limit blacks' freedom of movement and to infringe upon their free right of contract. White state governments also received support from plumbers, barbers, unions, and medical groups, all dominated by whites, who established a variety of tests to keep blacks out of their ranks. By the way, one of my friends, now dead for several years, economist Walter Williams, did a very good book on this called The State Against Blacks, mostly focused on post-World War II laws. And it had to do with the fact that many of these licensing structures, fees, having to have a license to do hair, et cetera, had far less to do with safety and health than it did with keeping blacks and minorities out of those professions. These were things that you could go into fairly easily without a whole lot of training and certainly without a lot of education. So after World War II, a number of unions and trade groups tried to pass these kinds of laws to keep black competitors out. The U.S. Supreme Court in the so-called slaughterhouse cases finally ruled that if economic regulations did not explicitly discriminate, they were valid. Not till 1905, with a decision in the case of Lochner v. New York, did the court reverse itself and bar certain types of discriminatory state, union, guild, and business regulation. It was a hollow victory for the freedmen 30 years too late to do them any good. Black codes alone, however, even without the supporting labor regulations, sufficiently alarmed Northerners, threatening no less than a backdoor re-enslavement of black men. And General O. Howard ordered his Freedmen's Bureau to disregard the state laws. Northern newspapers editorialized against the codes, but their complaints did not stop South Carolina and Louisiana from enacting similar, though milder, versions of the black codes, and the towns of Opelousas and Franklin passed still more stringent measures. Florida, however, topped them all. By 1866, Florida's population was nearly half black, and its white legislature teetered on the brink of paranoia. Florida laws required a death penalty for burglary, insurrection, except when the insurrection was by ex-Confederates, and of course, rape of only white women. Freedmen were allowed to have schools, but not at state expense, like whites. Blacks are denied the right to bear arms or assemble after dark, clearly violating the provisions of the United States Constitution. Remember last time we said that the freedom of blacks really relied on the three boxes: the jury box, the ballot box, and the cartridge box. That was said by Frederick Douglass. At the other end of the spectrum were the lenient codes of Tennessee and Virginia, but the black codes created a major backlash in the North. Some states repealed their black codes, but it was too late. By then, congressional radicals were arguing that the codes were further evidence that the South would never reform itself. Associated with the imposition of the black codes was the birth and growth of the Ku Klux Klan, a Pulaski, Tennessee white supremacy group founded in 1866. The Klan held a regional meeting a year later in Nashville, where former Confederate General Nathan Bedford Forrest became its first grand wizard, wearing white sheets and hoods not only to conceal their identities, but they thought to play on the superstitious, quote unquote, nature of blacks. Klansmen spread a reign of terror across the South, lynching blacks and any whites who might support them. The Klan, although not yet including Catholics and Jews in its attacks, often left its calling card, a burning cross, at a terror scene. Eventually, the Klan spread nationally through the establishment of klaverns, local organizations, but it had its greatest 19th century influence in Tennessee, North Carolina, Georgia, Alabama, and Mississippi. Other copycat white supremacy groups followed, with the White Brotherhood, the Men of Justice, the Constitutional Union Guards, and the Knights of the White Camellia. Mayhem and violence spread. Albion Tourgy, a northern carpetbagger who became a North Carolina judge, counted 12 murders, 9 rapes, and 14 cases of arson, and over 700 beatings in his political district alone. Tourgy's novel, A Fool's Errand, exposed in fiction some of the harsh realities of the Klan terror in the South. One of the bloodiest incidents occurred in 1873 at the Colfax, Louisiana courthouse, where a white mob attacked armed blacks, killing more than 100 and mutilating their bodies. The federal government, after indicting 98 whites, convicted only 3, and even those convictions were later thrown out by the Supreme Court in the Cruikshank decision, which said that the Reconstruction amendments only applied to governments, not the actions of individuals. Not only had the federal government failed to give the freedmen land, but it also failed to facilitate their self-defense, which made the 14th Amendment and its reaffirming of all the Constitution's protections, including the Second Amendment, though not specifically mentioned in the 14th Amendment, all the more important. If any agency could have addressed some of the needs of the freedmen, it was the Freedmen's Bureau. Yet the history of the Bureau shows it was not capable of dealing with the likes of the Ku Klux Klan or the Black Codes. Nevertheless, the Freedmen's Bureau provides an object lesson in the limits of both good intentions and government power. Now, I want to reiterate this because it comes up a lot. The KKK was a Democrat organization. Remember my earlier comments. Jesus said you cannot get good fruit from a bad tree. The Democrat Party was created to perpetuate slavery, and more of its fruit is the KKK. That is not Republican, had nothing to do with the Republicans ever, anytime, anywhere. It was always, always, always Democrats. Never let them forget that. They cannot slide away from that terrorist organization. O. Howard and the Freedmen's Bureau. In March 1865, Congress created the Freedmen's Bureau to help former slaves in their transition to freedom. Run by General Oliver Otis O. Howard, the Bureau lay for months at the center of the struggle between the Treasury and the War Department over which would handle the freedmen after the war. Stanton's War Department won, as it would ultimately have to enforce any edicts, and Stanton trusted Howard as an honest and effective leader. Although an executive branch agency, the Freedmen's Bureau was viewed by Congress as a wedge with which it could gain control of Reconstruction. O. Howard was hardly physically intimidating. Possessing a slight build, quote, fidgety gestures, and a shrill voice, the general was nonetheless a morally imposing figure, quote, proud that he was known in the nation as the Christian soldier. A devout believer who insisted that his subordinates attend prayer meetings and enforce temperance among his troops, he had long opposed slavery, though he did not have the abolitionist credentials of his brother, Roland. O. had studied at West Point, where before the war, criticism of slavery was prohibited. His studies, however, marked him for success. He graduated fourth behind Robert E. Lee's son, Custis. After Fort Sumter, Howard served in several field commands in the East, then in occupation forces. He reveled in giving Christian inspirational talks to his freedmen's children at the schools established in the Sea Islands. Howard asked the central question facing the government, quote, what shall we do with the Negro, unquote. He answered by emphasizing education and Christianity. The Bureau would unleash, quote, a great commission of compassionate Americans, teachers, ministers, farmers, superintendents, who would aid and elevate the freedmen. Biblical charity, however, always came with strict stipulations, quote, he who will not work will not eat, for example, and the numerous provisions in Proverbs against sloth. Howard did not see that the do-gooder instinct would unleash a monster that would spread in 3 separate directions. First, although the Bureau definitely aided the freedmen more than any other agency or group, it inevitably fostered dependence on government. Second, social work of this type often, if not always, tends to puff up the provider, whose role as a source of blessings inflates his own sense of worth, not to mention ego. It is not surprising, therefore, that Northerners who came south with good intentions ended up branded as carpetbaggers, seen only as leeches sucking off Southern vitality. Third, the Bureau itself, like all government institutions, was bound to be corrupted by the flow of money and the religious zeal of the participants. When nothing short of heaven on earth is at stake, the disappearance or unauthorized use of funds and equipment cannot stand in the way of progress. As an effective office carrying out policies philosophically more in tune with those of congressional radicals, the Freedmen's Bureau was itself bound to become a source of controversy. For example, Howard supported key legislation during the presidential Reconstruction that brought the 40 acres and a mule dispute to a head. A March 3rd, 1865 act of Congress gave commissioners of the Bureau authority to, quote, select and set apart such confiscated and abandoned lands and property as may be deemed necessary for the immediate use of the refugees, unquote. Howard then affixed his own circular order number 13 in July, saying that the amnesty proclamation, quote, will not be understood to extend to the surrender of abandoned or confiscated property, unquote. This amounted to nothing less than Howard's attempting to hijack Johnson's policy to meet his own radical ends, and Johnson rebuked him. Undeterred, Howard instituted quiet yet forceful opposition to Johnson's policies, constituting an act of insubordination on behalf of blacks, no different from Sherman's defiance of Lincoln. With the rescinding of Circular Order number 13, any hope for reasonably quick march towards self-sufficiency for the freedmen vanished. Most turned their expectations from land ownership to wage labor. Quote, the Yankees preach nothing but cotton, cotton, complained Sea Island's freedmen. It was equally unrealistic, however, to expect former slaves who'd worked for nothing all their lives to suddenly display as a group the traits of capitalist entrepreneurs who'd scrimped, saved, and suffered in their own way to accumulate wealth. Entrepreneurship and capital formation skills did not come to any group instantly or easily. The Bureau did what it could, attempting to police the work contracts, but was often viewed as little more than, quote, planters' guards and nothing else, unquote. Even there, however, one way lower paid groups got ahead was by fighting for their own wage increases, moving to better jobs, and most of all, starting their own businesses, of which the Bureau inadvertently discouraged. Okay, that's a good place to stop. We will pick up with that next time. This is a long section on the freedmen. So I will see you guys back here next time. And until then, stay wild.